We're going to get started here. So, good morning so far? Yeah? Okay. Like the chatter stuff? What do you think of that the new red guy running around here? That adds a little bit of spice, right? Thanks for coming to the session. I know it was a long 3 hours in the chair, and to make your way across here to my session, we very much appreciate it. So, my name is Chris Barbin, CEO of Appirio. I'll talk a little bit about the company, but really, as a result of kind of in this last session, being there and kind of hearing for 3 hours, a bunch of slides, some demos, we're actually going to bring up a couple of customers and want to make this more interactive. There'll be a Q&A session. So I'm going to run through about 15 minutes worth of slides. I'm going to bring up two real pioneers and innovators in the space. Mark Newhall, who many of you have probably seen over the years, is a 10-year Salesforce vet, and very, very lucky to have him here with us today. And Dick Eskew, CIO of Rehab Care, who's doing some really intriguing things in the healthcare space, with all the healthcare reform going on these days. I think you'll be happy to hear his story. So I'm not going to read the safe harbor statement because you saw it on a much bigger screen a little bit earlier on. And as I said, what we're going to talk about today, I'll do a little bit of a tee-up as to what is cloudsourcing. We'll open up the panel discussion with Mark and Dick, and then we'll open it up to the room for Q&A. Before I actually dive in, though, I want to do a little level set on the room, see who's in here. So quick show of hands. Raise your hand if you represent the business side of your organization. So you're in one of the functions, sales, services, marketing, HR. Raise them a little bit higher so I can see them. Okay. And raise your hand if you're on the IT side. Okay, so it's probably a 40-60 split of business and IT. And if you didn't raise your hand, I don't know what you're doing here. The second thing is, what about company size? Raise your hand if you're with a company that is under 1,000 employees. Okay. And over 1,000? Okay, so it's probably 60-40, 60 under, 40% over 1,000 employees. Now, a little bit of just sophistication with the Salesforce platform. So raise your hand if you've built a custom application on Force.com. Okay, handful. What about multiple custom applications? Any power users in here? Okay, so I'm not going to take any questions from any of you. Okay, great. All right. And then show of hands on just SFA users, just Salesforce automation users. And call center users, Service Cloud? Okay. All right, so we got a pretty good mix, pretty diverse mix here. It's very helpful, thank you. A little bit on Appirio. So you've probably seen our booths on the show floor, people running around. We have about 75 people here at the show. We are a 3-year-old company that is completely focused on helping medium to large enterprises migrate to the cloud. The background of the founders of the company are all in traditional legacy enterprise software, tying together and implementing things like SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards, PeopleSoft. We did this for a career and figured out, hey, there's a lot better way in this cloud thing. Started the company about 3 years ago. We've now worked with about 2,500 companies, 200 or so on the consulting side of our business, over 2,000 that are using our products that connect the cloud, and products that we built on top of Salesforce, Google, etc. Some of the biggest Salesforce customers in the world, including Japan Post, Qualcomm, Flextronics, Genentech, Starbucks, have worked with us over the last 3 years using our products and our professional services. We have deep relationships with Salesforce, also work very closely with Google, Amazon, Facebook, and are starting to do a little bit of work with Workday as well in HR and financials. So what are we focused on? I guess a quick show of hands on The Big Switch. Who's read the book, The Big Switch by Nick Carr? Okay. Highly, highly recommend if you are in this room and at this conference, go buy this book or download it to your Kindle if you're a Kindle person. It is a fascinating book that actually we have as required reading for everybody that comes into Appirio, into the company. And it talks about the technology disruption that's happening and draws an analogy to the electric utility disruption that happened from 1900 to 1930. In 1900, only about 5% of electric power came from the grid, 5%. Over a 30-year period, it went from 5% to 100%. So when it was 5%, people generated their own power. They had their own power plants in their homes, in their businesses, and they slowly learned that, you know what, it was a lot more efficient to get it from Commonwealth Edison or PG&E, et cetera. And so that 30-year transition happened. And Nick Carr, in this book, explains that the power plant of yesterday is the data center of today. And more computing power will come off of the grid, in this case from providers like Salesforce.com, Google, Amazon, et cetera. So again, highly recommend that. So we're working, one way I like to think about it is, as a company, we're helping erect the telephone poles and the wires and helping people put the sockets in to connect to that grid. Okay? So again, highly recommend reading that book. And the momentum is significant, as you heard today. There are 2 million paid subscribers of Salesforce, 20 million people using Google Apps, their professional edition. That's, a lot of people use Gmail personally, but Google Apps is really taking off. 3,000 small businesses a day are signing up for Google Mail, Calendar, Docs, Sheets, et cetera. And over 500,000 developers on Amazon building custom applications on their infrastructure layer. Okay. So, cloud computing. When you ask 10 people what is cloud computing, you'll get 12 answers. Maybe 15, maybe 20. Not all cloud is created equal. We recently published a cloud ecosystem map that defines the layers of the cloud and what is truly cloud and what's not. We wrote a blog on it earlier this week. I encourage you to check it out. But we actually describe and define the cloud in 3 layers. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this because this will set the context for the questions and discussions we have with Mark and Dick. The first layer, and where most people have had a lot of success in the last 10 years, is in the software as a service, the application layer. Deploying individual apps like CRM, HR, in some cases mail, Gmail as I referred to, but individual apps, moving them off of on-premise and into the cloud. But more and more, we're seeing today people building custom apps, as there was probably 20% of the people in this room, building custom apps on platforms like Force.com or Google App Engine, but also doing pilots with infrastructure as a service, storage as a service, Amazon's S3 or EC2. And these are small projects, test infrastructure. But today, what you'll see is very high use of applications, moderate use of custom apps in the cloud, and then pilots of kind of burst and test infrastructure at the infrastructure layer. But thinking about the cloud in those 3 layers, software, applications, platforms, and infrastructure. Where things are moving in the next 3 years, and there are pioneers and early adopters, of which we'll hear a couple of today, where the majority of packaged apps and custom apps will be in the cloud. So the majority. What you would see, as we see with a couple hundred customers we've worked with, organizations typically have hundreds of applications. It's not just dozens, it's hundreds. Sometimes thousands of applications that have been built up and grown over the years. A lot of companies go through acquisitions. So not only do you have this compounding effect, then you have multiple data centers. I was formerly CIO myself of Borland Software. We had a 1,000-person company. We had 1,000 servers across hundreds of applications in 8 data centers. It's one of the reasons why we started Appirio, because we went and fixed that problem. We wanted to help other companies fix that problem. But what we're finding is that people now are saying, I want to move the majority of my applications to the cloud. They'll take mission-critical apps often, and we'll put them off to the side. Say my MRP, my ERP, maybe my financials. I'm going to keep those over here on-premise for right now. But I have these hundreds of others that I want to move to the cloud. Help me with the roadmap to do that. And in the next 3 years, we believe the majority of those will move to the cloud. And you'll see more and more pilots of legacy apps migrating on the infrastructure side as well. The next trend that we see happening in the next 5 years plus is this combination of cloud plus outsourcing, or cloudsourcing. If you look at companies starting today like Appirio, there's no need to ever own a server, ever. Why would you ever have a server on-premise? I actually think it's been a fascinating experience for me personally looking for space as a company. Like we've grown to a couple hundred people. These real estate brokers bring me around. And one of the first things they all want to do is show you the server room. Look at how cool it is. It's got elevated floors. We keep it at this temperature. It's got these cool racks. I think there's a great business in actually turning those into wine rooms. And that's like the next business. Let's turn all those racks into wine racks. But you don't need those anymore. As a company of our size, and we run a couple hundred-person company completely in the cloud, the notion of doing that at the medium to large enterprise where everything is in the cloud, it's completely in the cloud and will always be. Now, doing that for the enterprise is harder because you have to migrate there. You have stuff you got to get rid of. You have to integrate. There's external factors. There's legacy that you have to get rid of. But more and more companies, we believe, will make this move to complete cloud sourcing, where everything is outsourced or cloud sourced, which would drive tremendous benefits. We actually put a white paper out on this. Would encourage you to read. So today, when we bring Mark and Dick up here, they're really focused in the middle of this area. They've been successful in their roles doing individual applications, that top left, but they're moving down and doing more and more custom apps, really pioneering this middle column, and again, the future being everything completely in the cloud from a cloud sourcing perspective. Why do you do this? You guys all know the reasons. You heard it all morning for 3 hours. Better, faster, cheaper. I'm not going to beat on this. It makes a lot of sense. To do this, you drive 30 to 50% savings. As a company, we have our cost of IT at 1.86% of revenue. Benchmarks at our size company are 7%. So we run about a third of the cost. What we're finding from a pattern is that organizations are not only doing this to save money, though, it's a strategic initiative. People are driving strategic decisions to move to the cloud, but also they've had experiences in individual apps. The two of them together are really driving people to do more and more in the cloud. The business case that people are making is really multiple tiers. First, we'll find in the center here, there are often migration triggers. You might be on an app, a SalesLogix, a Clarify, a Vantiv, and you're like, the maintenance window's coming up, I got to get off. That's a pretty common trigger. There's also then this balance of risk and reward. And how do I take this migration trigger with, if I have to move this, I got to make sure that I'm keeping my risk down and that they actually get the ROI. On top of that, you want to be driving cost savings and making sure there's a technical fit. So really assessing the portfolio, looking across the portfolio, and making a decision to make this journey. And what we've also found in the last 3 years is that people, it's not a matter of if I'm going to move to the cloud, it's how and when. People are picking and driving a roadmap. CIOs who have been surrounded by business users working around them are saying, you know what, I need to get ahead of this. I need to create a plan. I'm going to do this thoughtfully with an actual architecture to move to the cloud over time. So again, it's how am I going to do it and when, not if I'm going to move to the cloud, is the common pattern we're seeing. And enterprises are now relying on different types of partners. Current on-premise partners, big global SIs of the world, have typically built up competency in managing server farms, and they're invested in the status quo, supporting big partnerships that throw off billions in revenue for them, spending a lot of money just to keep the lights on. Today, it's all about how do you connect the clouds, do it efficiently, get people live quickly, and that will free up dollars so that you can grow and transform the business. So if you imagine in everyone in this room, especially the folks that, the smaller folks, they're doing more and more of the cloud every day, the bigger organizations, imagine if you had the opportunity to spend a lot less, but to get that level of innovation that you saw this morning, where you could just turn on that chatter and get those feeds. You can get incremental functionality. One of the things that's been amazing for me in starting Appirio is that we opened a Japanese operation November of last year. We've been a Google Apps user from the beginning. We use Google Video with our Japanese operation almost every day. That just showed up for us. It just showed up in our mail infrastructure. Microsoft Exchange rolling out video chat, imagine doing that as a company today across the business, really hard. The level of innovation you can take advantage of. We do video conferencing with our international operation. It just showed up and we didn't pay a dime for it. So that level of innovation you could take advantage of in the cloud world. So you need a partner that can help you make that plan, make that journey, thinks about it differently, will help and manage that risk with you, and will work with you to support your business ongoing. So with that, I want to bring up Mark and Dick. It's been a pleasure to work with them, do quick intros on their businesses. MarketForce is the world's leading supplier of customer intelligence They have over 300 of the world's largest multi-location businesses. Mark will give you a little bit more detail. They have a field network of 300,000 independent, basically spies out there that are looking at understanding what's happening in certain businesses, like Walmart, as an example. And so Mark came into the organization as a former Salesforce evangelist from Corporate Express, and really is trying to drive their business forward and looking at how they can really redesign the architecture, their IT operations. And again, I think we're really we're super excited to have him on the panel and to be working with him as a partner. Rehab Care and Dick is in a fascinating time with healthcare reform right now. They have 12,000 employees, 1,200 hospitals, providing long-term care facilities throughout the United States. Just are in the process of going through a $600 million acquisition, and have been very successful with Salesforce core applications, and also doing work with Google, but really are looking to transform their business moving forward with Force.com and other cloud providers. So I'll ask Mark and Dick to come on up, and I'll stop talking about you, and you can talk about yourself.
Sit down.
Sit down. You can stand if you want.
All right.
Okay. All right. Why don't we? We'll start with you, Mark. He's telling me a funny story this morning. Not a funny story. This is what, your 10th Dreamforce?
Not quite. That's number 7.
Number 7. And the first one was how many people?
I think maybe 300 or so. A few more this time.
We were at the executive dinner last night, which was bigger than 300. And so to see 19,000 people in a room today,
it's been amazing.
Probably a pretty interesting change. So maybe you could start with, as a pioneer, tell a little bit about your Corporate Express experience. You started with Service Cloud very, very early on as a core app, and then built a lot around it. But then what are you thinking about now as you take on a completely different role at MarketForce?
Sure. I was with Corporate Express for about 14 years, and roughly half of that time was spent deploying in-house ERP. We purchased from 93 to 99 about 450 independent office products dealers. And every time we bought a company, we bought a culture and a system and a catalog and a theory about the right way to do business. And we made those purchases in 20 countries around the world. So I kind of lived on an airplane for a good chunk of those first 7 years, deploying essentially a $250 million software and technology investment, putting that kind of 450 company puzzle together. When it was over in early 2002, Salesforce was coming onto our radar screen. We literally had a sales manager in Southern California buying licenses over the web with a credit card and expensing it. And what was interesting was they were using it as the catalyst between inside and outside sales, and they were just knocking it out of the park. They had great results, and our CEO kept saying, all I keep hearing about is Salesforce is a great enabler in Southern Cal. And, Newhall, you don't have anything to do anymore since we're all done with ERP. Go check out, what that is. And very long story short, we initially rolled out Salesforce automation across the U.S. We moved up into Canada, Australia, and around Europe with Salesforce automation to about 3,300 or so users around the world. We then went for some pretty major consolidation activity and really centralization activity where we utilized the information and the application to really enable a lot of that consolidation. So we went from about 3,300 users. We started pushing the app through corporate communications, marketing, operations, logistics, customer care, help desk, creating all kinds of workflows and dashboards and reporting and triggers and so forth, and got up to a user population of just over 6,000 people worldwide. So we had the distinction of being Salesforce's largest customer, really first large enterprise customer for a number of years. So I've had lots of exposure to people like Chris and lots of relationships over the last 7 or 8 years about kind of what's gone on in the space. If you know anything about Corporate Express, you know that they were taken over by Staples about 1.5 years ago. And I was in the capacity of Chief Strategy Officer, and they made it quite clear that of all the things they bought at Corporate Express, our strategy wasn't one of them. And so after some time off, I met up with a private equity group that owns MarketForce Information, and actually a kind of a similar story. It's a bit of a roll-up. 4 acquisitions in the last 4 years. The company's just 4 years old. And we do 3 things in our business today. We focus on covert and overt shopping, sometimes called Mr. Shopping, with multi-location businesses. So clients like Burger King and McDonald's and Wendy's and ConocoPhillips convenience stores and so forth. We're out there measuring what's the experience that's been engineered and is it actually being delivered and to what extent. And where are the insights about that experience? And then really what's most important is where can you action it to make it better, location by location. We do that with kind of in that food and convenience store space. We do merchandising and audit work for Walmart and Target and some of the big box retailers. And then we also work in the entertainment business with Sony and Warner Brothers and Lionsgate, really all of the theater or studio companies on first release blockbuster weekend. So everything about the movie-going experience as it happens at midnight on a Thursday through the weekend. How did the movie do? Exit polling, trailers, anti-piracy. We're inspecting all of that. And what's intriguing about kind of the cloud, for me going from Corporate Express, an $8 billion multinational company and 6,000 Salesforce users, to Marketforce, which is essentially a private equity play, just over $50 million in revenue, but with a 300,000 person force, if you will, out there. And thinking about how can we direct them, how can we push assignments to them, how can we collect data in closer to real time, how can we turn actionable results around to our customers in close to real time. So that's kind of been the transition for me. It's been a few months now, and one of the first calls I made was to Chris to say, this is ripe for what we did over the last 10 years. This is a company that has very old technology. It works. It's kind of workhorse technology, but doing things as simple as changing a dashboard for a customer today takes about 30 days. And when you look at the things we looked at this morning, you can kind of start to see the possibilities and how do we, as the biggest in our space, really destroy our competitors, if you will, by going a whole lot faster and also just really locking up these relationships with these customers. It's been amazing to me as I've come into Marketforce that the C-level in all of these clients is who's buying our services. It's not commoditized like Office Products was, and it's very close to the CMOs, the CEOs, the COOs, what's actually happening out there. And as we show them some of these prototypes that we're building here in early days in the cloud, they literally sit there and stare at you and say, where did you get this? Because they're so used to 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, if they can ever even get what it is that they want. And so we're pretty excited about the opportunities.
Great, great. Dick, maybe you can dive in a little bit here. You've been you were at Dreamforce last year. You heard a story at a session like this from the Schumacher Group. Was inspired to do more than SFA with your business. Maybe talk a little bit about your company to start, but also where you're going to go beyond SFA and some of the process and the path that you've taken there so far.
Okay. He's right. I came to Dreamforce for the first time last year, and I was particularly curious about platform as a service because I really didn't know what they meant by that. And we had a great rollout of the SFA product. It was the quietest, smoothest conversion I had ever been part of. So I had a good impression of Salesforce going in, but I listened to a presentation by a company called the Schumacher Group and another one, a company called Job Science. And Job Science was particularly interesting because this was a software vendor who's written their entire product in the Force.com platform. And it's a very sophisticated product. So that made a big impression on me. And then Schumacher Group was a similar story to ours, workforce spread out across the country. And he was demoing apps that they had written. And they were talking about incredible time to value, very short development cycle. Not spending money up front, don't buy hardware, you don't buy software, you don't have to build all this infrastructure and buy all this third-party types of security or whatever. You just start building your app. And so very literally, so coincidentally, when I came here, we had an opportunity back home in St. Louis of a very important paper-based function that was causing us to lose business. We were taking too long to do what we call a pre-admission screen. It's very important to get information about a patient that's being referred from an acute care setting into a post-acute setting. You don't want people that are too sick or not sick enough. You've got to get them in the right setting of care, or they don't get the right care, you don't get reimbursed, and so on. And so it's a thorough process, and we were doing it all on paper. And our CEO was very frustrated with it because we were taking 6 to 8 hours to turn these around. Our competitor was turning them around in 3 hours. So we're losing a lot of good referrals. And so he sort of set the challenge out. I want this down to an hour, and it's got to be mobile, because this is ridiculous in this day and age to do anything that ties people to a desktop, much less a fax machine. And so when I came here, I had a couple of .NET programmers back home starting to work on taking this form and getting it off of paper and automate it. No idea how they were going to make it mobile at the moment. And after hearing these presentations, I mean, literally, I called the guys up and I just said, stop what you're doing. Why don't you get on Force.com, download that developer toolkit, and then we'll hook up next week when I'm back. Literally, when I got back, they showed me the app on the iPhone. And I was impressed. and so, you know, so we went from there. We already had a contract. We just made a few adjustments with our contract so that we could do this. We actually rewrote the app over the next 4 days, got a little bit of help from Salesforce, because we were just, quite frankly, we thought, you know, well, we've had no training in Apex. We're not trained on any of this. You know, these are .NET guys. And the .NET guys were a little embarrassed, too. They're kind of like going, well, you know, if I'd done this in .NET, I could have done this. And it's like, and none of it mattered. None of the stuff they talked about mattered at all. The time to value and delivering this literally is just a configuration saying we want it on the iPhone. Done. Reports, they're there. Start customizing them. Yeah, you could have total control of your customization if you did it in a different platform, but it wasn't needed. Nobody needed it. We needed to solve a problem. And this has changed everything, really, at Rehab Care. I can't overstate that. It's the perception of IT is of being, you know, the black hole. Spend lots of money, pay up front, and wait for months and months and months for something to be delivered, and maybe it's what we need. It's just, that's gone now. It's everybody's thinking of IT. How do we use IT to grow the business? How are we going to use IT to transform the business? Because we can do stuff so fast now. And so we've started working with Appirio to really go to that next level. We're developing out very significant growth strategies. I try not to get too carried away and call them transformational strategies, but they really are. We want to compete. We want to change the way we compete for business using IT, and the time to value of this model is so great that's what we're going to build it upon.
Maybe I'll ask one more question of both of you, and then we'll open it up for some questions, and we can tie it back to the cloudsourcing piece. Both of you have gone through recently for lack of a better phrase, business model prototyping, where you're taking prototype applications and you're showing them into the business, and then you're saying, you know, maybe I'll use this, maybe I won't. Sometimes you're putting them into production. Can you talk a little bit about how you've done that, how that's different from the past, and where do you go from here with that strategy?
I definitely talk about Appirio here in particular. That's their methodology. So after we had that success just on our own, we decided to take on much bigger things, and so we looked across the spectrum and interviewed a few firms, including Appirio. And one of the things that I liked about Appirio's model or methodology was ends up with, if you will, the first deliverable being a prototype, and it's an honest-to-God prototype. It's not PowerPoint slides. It's the system, not fully baked by any means, but enough of the system so that when you're taking that presentation to the next level or to your customers to go, this is our idea, let me show you. And I'm showing you a pretty well-baked prototype and go, would you buy this? Do you like this? Are you taking it to the CEO for financial approval and presenting the ROI? I'm showing them the system, and that's way more powerful, I'm stating the obvious here, than PowerPoint slides, right? And I love this methodology of building the prototype. And again, it goes, you can do that with these tools that quickly.
Remember about 5 years ago, Mark Benioff called and said, we're going skiing, come on up. I'm taking some of our developers with us. And that was the very first time in my career that literally Mark would be sitting there with Parker and they'd be coding or whatever they were doing. And he'd spin the laptop around and he would say, would you use this? How would you use it? What if this icon was here? What if, and the way you can be, just kind of poking at you the whole time. And it was fascinating to me because I had just spent so many years in, again, business requirements and gap analysis and, re-engineering and training and deployment and security and, all that other stuff. And the same thing that Mark did, I think, to build, Salesforce, you can do with these types of prototypes now with customers. I was with one of our clients last week in Oklahoma City with essentially a cloud app where we were able to, instead of have a long drawn-out business requirement session and so forth, we were able to just push their data into the tool, go through a whole bunch of functionality, and it's kind of a collaborative, what do you think? And I think we're moving more towards business people designing business solutions. And, you kind of get a bit of a throwaway, you used this word at breakfast this morning, a mentality where, if it doesn't work, all right, well, let's save it as something else and kind of keep going. And, you haven't kind of bet the farm on this has got to work and big bang and everything else, which, again, I think a lot of us have lived in. And I think that's where, I know with our clients, and even internally, they sit up and really take notice that, this is a whole different way, and it's actually interesting, and I feel, vested in it, and like someone's actually listening to me. And I think that these things in the cloud, solutions in the cloud, really lend themselves to that type of prototyping that's fast and sufficient.
Why don't we pause here, see if there's any questions. If you do have a question, if you could walk up to the mic, or you could shout it out and I'll just repeat it. Any questions from the crew? I have plenty more I can ask these guys if you just defer to me. Yes, in the back.
So you came from a .NET environment, so you have X amount of .NET developers, and now you've embraced the cloud, and it's simpler, it's more, kind of give and take. So what did that do to your model from a development point of view? Were you able to get more out the door, new staff, some combination thereof?
You just repeat the question because they're recording this. Question is around just .NET staff. How does your staff, your model change as a result of moving to the cloud and/or Force.com?
We are, well, they see what's coming, and it's not unlike what we had to do with our data center. It's like there's no strategic value in me running a data center. There's no strategic value in me trying to manage Citrix and Exchange. We have 60, 70 people in IT, for example, and so every FTE really matters. And so sometimes for that size company, you might be able to get by with one Citrix guy, but then you're only one deep, so you're going to have a second guy, and it's inefficient. And so why don't I outsource that and get the benefit? Somebody who does it for a living, the company exists for the purpose of managing my infrastructure, let them manage my infrastructure. The developers see where we're headed. They can't compete with this type of approach. And I heard the job science guy say this last year. He was a little more in your face with it. He was kind of like, it's like you're going to develop in this platform or get out. And we don't have that big a development staff. And actually, I think the guys that so far have embraced it, they're kind of like, going, yeah, this is a new tool. If they read it all, why fight it? It's like, get on board and learn how to use these. Why wouldn't you want to be good at Apex? Why not? I don't know if I answered your question, but that's been the reaction at our place. And that's going to be an individual thing. Some guys are just, I got a couple of guys clinging to their Citrix skills, but I'm not going to keep that in-house.
I will say, having worked across and with a lot of CIOs, one of the biggest questions is, how do I retool my staff? I have a boatload of .NET or Java. I do development in a very structured, waterfall-based way. I have these roles. And the technology actually has become really the easy part. It's the change management of IT and the business, that is a lot more of the challenging work and a lot more art required. And so we end up spending a lot of time doing this type of prototyping alongside of these developers so that they can see the light. And sometimes they get on board, sometimes they don't. But the roles change. There is a role change in terms of the types of roles you have in the org. The other is just the development process. Much more agile, iterative. We're talking about prototyping versus the waterfall, big bang, come out the door 3 years later maybe. And the requirements have changed 3 times since. So I would say that staff composition does change skills and the process, and it is a commonly asked question in the IT shops we're working with.
I actually have our Director of Developments in the room here with us, and we kicked off our road mapping session. It's a little bold, but we said to the group, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance far less. And it kind of split the group pretty quick.
Another question over here?
Given the rapid time to value and the shift in development cycle, how do you manage when you could have multitude of solutions or prototypes in different parts of the organization being developed, deploying them to production? How do you make sure that the code base is three people, one is not stepping on the other's toes? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So the question is, with rapid prototyping, a lot of different things happening. How do you roll all that together and make sure that you're migrating into production and don't kind of trip on yourself? If I'm paraphrasing, I apologize, but I think that's what I heard. So, I'll take a crack at it, but would love your thoughts. I actually think that is one of the areas that there is a lot of prototyping going on to sell projects, if you will, to get the ROI, to get people bought in. In some cases, people are putting those into production and just saying, this is one of the examples that you had. It went from a proof of concept, if you will, to 400 people using it. That can also be a little dangerous if you don't do it with some forethought to what your longer-term strategy and architecture is. So one of the things we often talk about is, take a step back and do some portfolio analysis and a higher-level architecture over time, and so you can understand how you want to weave the cloud into your strategy long-term. Because if you just create a lot of one-off apps and you don't have a bigger plan in mind, you create, I call them SaaS silos, and that's a problem. So thinking through that up front. Meanwhile, though, it is really helpful and important to create these apps, get them out there, prove the value, but there does need to be almost a concurrent path whereby you're looking at the longer-term strategy. So I don't know if you want to add thoughts.
Well, the story I shared, it's close to what you're asking. We did make some mistakes in hindsight, and actually working with Appirio, we're trying to be very careful this time that we don't do that, and it is very much part of their methodology. We're really trying to create a data model, so they're asking all the right questions, looking at everything. We developed that first app so rapidly and deployed it so rapidly. Several months into it, we were going, oh, man, if we had thought of this, we would be able to just dump this data straight in, hey, it's a good referral. All right, click a button and dump the data. And we didn't make stuff match. It gets very into the healthcare CPT codes, all this kind of stuff. And I was lamenting that to our CEO because that interface would have been another great time saver. And and this was great because I felt bad about it. And our programmer kind of felt bad about it too, that we didn't catch that. And the CEO was like, who cares? We've been getting so much value out of having this application for the last 6 months. Think about every admission we've made because we had this app. It translates into hundreds of thousands more dollars than this mistake if you go back and rewrite the whole app and correct it. So that was a great. That won't always happen by any means, but that's exactly what happened in this case. We don't want that to happen. I don't want to ever regret 6 months later. So that's why we're not doing it ourselves. We're bringing in outside help for the projects we're going to do going forward.
I have a question that's not 100% sure is relevant to this discussion, so I think it's off track, I know, but with healthcare in general, and your requirement to move massive amounts of data in terms of three-dimensional X-ray information, critical patient information, and then also the ability to data mine question is how are you addressing the strategy of moving massive amounts of information balanced with security compliance within the cloud? And do you have any insight into healthcare's sort of position on where those two main issues are today?
So one part of the answer is I'm strictly in the post-acute world. And in the acute world is where those massive amounts of data are. In other words, we don't have, most of our hospitals, if we have any X-ray technology, it's computed radiography. It's not MRIs and CTs. That just doesn't take place in the post-acute world. And so I don't have to deal with some of those massive amounts of data. But because we are in every post-acute setting, from nursing homes to long-term acute care hospitals to inpatient rehab hospitals, we are very interested in sharing information about, this type of stroke care. We can prove we're in enough sites, we're big enough to actually to write papers, to work at Washington to say, we have the evidence to show that this type of care delivers the best results in this setting of care, that type of thing. Or to help our clients not have people in the wrong setting of care and get them into the right setting of care for financial reasons as well as care reasons. Salesforce is actually, we've run into, and because people hire us, they outsource to us. Very often, as you can imagine, nursing homes don't have an IT department, but hospitals outsource to us. They usually have IT departments. Well, they got IT guys. And so I've been one of those hospital IT guys, and we're all about security, right? And so they'll see our person showing up with an iPhone, and they'll go, stop it. You're not allowed to use that here. And so we get into a lot of mobility questions. Is it secure? That leads to, and usually they're well read, and they know that you can jailbreak the iPhone in 5 seconds, right? So the security, the HIPAA compliance had to be on the Salesforce side. And in all honesty, it is not there. We're actually using beta code. Salesforce, and I think this is a compliment to them. Once they kind of finally realize that they can't just say pass that security off to the device, they realize they better step up and apply the encryption on their database. We have the beta code. We're using it, and we'll deploy it live in January. So to their credit, and it took like 2 months for them to do that. So that's the kind of stuff we've been running into. I don't know if I've given you any insight there or not, but.
No, that does answer my question. If we can talk offline.
Okay. All right.
Another question right here.
For you guys who are looking down from the top, what is this going to be an anxiety level about releasing large applications?
So the question is, from the top on down, what does this do for your anxiety level in terms of releasing large applications?
I'm less anxious. I just, it's kind of a common answer. Can I do it better than Salesforce can do it? Can I do it better than Google can do it? No way.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think it's, I hope I never have to release any, big bang applications anymore. And it's, I think 10 years ago that was a hard statement to make. It's getting easier and easier. I think it's, a lot of notion of running things in parallel, of kind of moving clients or internal operations over to the new app without having to dismantle the old app at the same time. Those are kinds of things that make it a whole lot easier. We haven't talked Big Bang. I haven't talked Big Bang from a software implementation in probably 5 years or so. So I'm not as anxious about it as we used to live those conversion weekends. So.
Any other questions? Yes.
Chris, you mentioned earlier that for some of your clients you might discuss, let's leave those mission critical apps alone right where they are right now, and we'll go work on some of the other customizations we can do for you. Is this more a we're not ready yet, do you think, or is it more of a management buy-in issue?
I think it's, so the question is, earlier talked about how many organizations, large organizations, are putting mission-critical apps off to the side and then handling all other apps or moving them to the cloud. I think you can only bite off so much at once. And many medium to large enterprises literally have hundreds, if not thousands, of apps. One of our customers right now has a gigantic Siebel implementation. It's massive and it's very customized, but there are 350 other apps that they are looking to move to the cloud systematically. And so the Siebel implementation is relatively new. They don't want to touch it right now, but the 350 other apps represents a tremendous amount of opportunity for them to make this migration. I think that there are, like financials as an example for the large enterprise, it's still early days. I think the folks over at Workday, as an example, are making good progress, but a 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 person organization that has Oracle financials, moving that completely to the cloud, there's a lot of other lower hanging fruit to tackle before that. What's that?
With that,
You've done Workday?
well, Oracle Financials now, it's not exactly the cloud, but we're completely on demand environment. It's just much more successful than our old.
Great. So we have a success story right here. Would you like to join the panel? Yeah, so I think that there are apps that aren't like full-scale MRP in the cloud right now, still pretty early. But you see things like Financial Force up on the screen and Glovia. There's people doing things that are highly transactional, complex applications in the cloud, but there's still a tremendous amount of opportunity. And if you look at the curve of this transition, we firmly believe this is a 10 to 15-year transition. We're still, enterprise software, this is still less than 10%, maybe even 5% of overall enterprise software is in the cloud today. When you're in a room like this and you're hearing 16 or 19,000 people evangelize and be all happy with 2 icons running around, you think that's everything. But still, large enterprises, there's a lot of evolution, and so I think people are just tackling the stuff that's easier to tackle first.
I do think there's an element, though, that is management readiness that's still there. I mean, for me, it's interesting, right? 2002, I had the first conversation in the boardroom, again, of an $8 billion public, global enterprise, and it was very uncomfortable for me to talk to them about, no, we don't have to build architecture and buy servers and secure it and all those other things. And that was, 6, 7 years ago. And over time, the dynamics of that group changed to where they really started to see the incremental successes and the adoption and the ease of implementation. And so they caught on to a point where it became, why wouldn't we do this in, the cloud with certain apps? But, at Marketforce, I'm now going through that same thing. It's like a repeat of the same movie from 7 years ago, because for management teams that have never done this, I mean, it's almost like, this autonomic response. It's like, I've got to go buy servers. I've got to go buy, even though you're telling me I don't need them, and we go through it all the time, like, no, we don't need any of that. And so it's a conditioning. And so I think there's a level of evangelizing that is still to come over these next, 3 to 5 years that's, going to, I think, exponentially change the trajectory. But there's still a ways to go. I just assumed going into this much smaller company that it would be easy, and it's actually just about as hard.
I think it's something, the evangelism is a good word. A big part of what we do, we have an offering that's free, but we go in and we call it a day in the cloud. And it's literally a half a day, actually, of just, here's what's possible in the cloud. Here's what companies like Japan Post and Starbucks and Flextronics and others are doing, just to get the wheels moving at the executive level of what's possible. Because oftentimes people still are just bucketing, oh, this just must be that sales thing or that call center thing. And when you can look at some of the major applications that are being developed, it opens a lot of eyes. So. We'll take one more question, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up here.
Chris, this question is for you. You said you're moving more now into custom Force.com applications. So I'm assuming you're getting more into mission critical stuff. So my question is are you coming with a top-down strategy where you start at the higher level, the CIO's office, the executive board, or are you doing a business unit approach? And if you are doing the latter, where you get a meeting from a business unit and you start to prototype and create excitement in the business unit, at what point are you engaging the higher level IT if it's a new client, somewhere the CIO's office doesn't know you yet? At what point before too much excitement is generated are you engaging IT to make sure they're
So the question is, how do you kind of engage business and IT on the custom app dev side? we, having been practitioners in the past and in business in the past, we push pretty early to get both involved as quickly as possible. Because if you just do one without the other, it can create problems. We as a business, I'd say, have focused much more on the CIO. Because I think SaaS has grown up on the business side, and the CIOs are now trying to figure out, how do I work this into my portfolio? And so we've, as a entry point, have gone much more to the CIO's office and are working with them to think much more strategically about a cloud roadmap over a 3 to 5 year period. But clearly, I think any project that needs to be successful, you have to have alignment across both business and IT. Okay, I want to ask one final question, and then we'll wrap up with a slide. But to both of you, so back to this slide that I shared earlier around the kind of evolution and migration towards cloud sourcing. I've kind of put you both in this middle bucket of at least having goals of having the majority of your applications in the cloud. Is that realistic? In what rough time frame? And do you think it's possible for either of your organizations to be completely in the cloud anytime in the call it medium term?
We're not starting with the core. If you think about the most difficult, whether it's financial systems or core transactional systems, we might be goofy, but we kind of think in terms of a Christmas tree. What are the core is that tree, and what are the ornaments hanging off of it? And we just see a pretty opportunity-rich environment to automate workflows and bring customer solutions and really displace a lot of these other things that are older that are kind of hanging off of that core. I think that the way we're constructing our roadmap is to build on a series of incremental successes, to have discipline and rigor around what we get after. And I think the projects will get more and more complex over time, the things that we'll tackle. And I think the capabilities that are out there in the cloud will get better and better at the same time. I'd much rather have successes on kind of those, supporting apps, if you will, and wait a little bit on the core. I'll also get a lot more, I think, buy-in and business sponsorship and tie-in by having those successes a bit distant from the core now, because we start talking about kind of ripping that out. That but does become a big IT project and so forth. But to your question, as we think about it, we think within the next 24 months or so, at least at Market Force, that becomes a reality. I mean, we don't really want to be in the IT business anymore. We want to be in, the market research business. So.
Dick?
I do think we'll get there. I'm convinced rehab care, it's the right fit for our company. Right now we're focusing on IT strategies for growth and transformation of the company. We want to compete totally differently. We want to just change the game. And so we will, after we create these new IT products that we're going to offer our customers, we'll start turning our attention to the back office and things like that. I think we will, I don't know if we'll only look at, but we will start the search only with cloud-based solutions. It's just, for me, asking for additional IT resources to work on business intelligence versus working on, well, okay, I'm going to need a guy that knows how to manage Oracle running Lawson. It just doesn't get me anywhere. I can add another guy that can crank out reports for you guys and deliver them on your iPhone, because that will either improve productivity or improve revenue. That's what they want. That's what our company wants. That's what I want to do. And so I've done 2 ERP implementations, and relatively speaking, they're successful, but I'd never want to do another one. Not from the IT side. It's just so, where's the ROI on it, and where it's so hard, it's so painful. Not a lot of satisfaction in it. So.
Great. All right, last slide, and then a couple just follow-ups here. Sorry about the... So just in summary, and I think actually you heard this from both Mark and Dick, certainly start small. We recommend that all the time, which is get a sense for what's possible, prototype, put it in production, or throw it away in some cases. But also think big. Really understand what a roadmap could look like. Do some of the data modeling out of the gate. Look at a longer-term architecture. Involve both business and IT. but think big. You saw a lot of big ideas on the screen today. Clearly, these guys are doing some things that are thinking big and different, not just internal IT, but go-to-market strategies. And the cloud ecosystem is very confusing right now. There are literally thousands of players. Everyone says they have a cloud offering. Study it in detail, understand a cloud is not a cloud is not a cloud in all cases. And make sure you're reaching out to folks like these guys, folks like us, that are really pioneering in the space. There's a lot to be learned. It is still early days, but it's exciting because there is a lot of potential here as we migrate this big switch. So I want to thank both Dick and Mark. We'll all be around here. We have 3 booths on the show floor if you want to visit any of us. We have a Cloudsourcing white paper that will be in the back. Lori has got it back there if anyone wants to pick it up. And I really appreciate your time and look forward to chatting with you guys. Thank you.